those who are fighting for the truth we hold dear to us on the front line. Of course, our relations with what is happening there is very important in terms of Russia's international standing in general. And we continue to carry out our independent foreign policy, and we seek to step up mutually beneficial ties with anyone who is ready to work with on an equal footing based on the universally recognized principles of international law. Other countries representing the global majority have the same policy. India is a good example in this regard. It seeks to maintain relations with all the sides, and it focuses on its domestic agenda in its foreign policy. Our two countries have converging goals and objectives, as confirmed during President Putin's visit to New Delhi and his talks to Prime Minister Modi in the Indian capital last week. Our priorities include stepping up strategic partnership and alliance with countries in our immediate neighborhood, with CIS countries. We are continuing to promote integration within the Union state. We're building a common single defense space as part of the Security Guarantees Treaty. There was a joint meeting of the boards of the foreign ministries of Belarus and Russia. And during this meeting, we agreed to further coordinate our foreign policy efforts and outlined specific objectives in this regard. We are developing our ties with Central Asian countries. In the second Russia-Central Asia Summit will take place in Dushanbe. The President of Kazakhstan, Mr. Tokayev, in November signed a declaration on elevating Russia-Kazakhstan relations to a comprehensive strategic partnership and alliance. There was a state visit by President Putin to Kyrgyzstan in late November, and we elevated our relations to an alliance and strategic partnership. There are efforts to promote ties within the CIS and the EAEU. There will be this new format, CIS Plus, launched in Dushanbe at the CIS summit next year. Russia will be chairing the CSTO and will work closely with its allies in order to reaffirm the standing of this organization in international affairs. If we're talking about Eurasia, Russia-China relations of comprehensive cooperation and strategic partnership are very important. We have our dialogue at the highest level, the leaders' diplomacy, as our Chinese friends say. Xi Jinping, the PRC president, visited Moscow to take part in Victory Day celebration, and then Putin paid a return visit to mark the end of the Second World War. To mark 80 years of victory over German Nazism and Japanese militarism, we shared this anniversary. Our two countries played a decisive role in these victories. Today, Moscow and Beijing form a diplomatic tandem which guarantees global stability in a multipolar world order. I believe that our compatriots will appreciate the ability to travel, to benefit from visa-free travel to China. We are developing our partnership ties with Pyongyang, considering that our two countries signed a treaty in the summer of 2024, and we're sincerely grateful to our North Korean friends for helping us liberate the Kursk region from Ukrainian fighters. We believe that our relations enjoy positive momentum in various domains, and we welcome this We also work together within the United Nations. There are great opportunities in connection with the Treaty on the Comprehensive Cooperation and Strategic Partnership with Iran. We're developing our relations with Turkey and with other countries. So far, Russia has been focusing on the Eurasian continent. We have a number of flagship initiatives to create the Greater Eurasian Partnership as a space of security and cooperation. We are working together with our Belarusian allies on a charter on diversity and multipolarity in the 21st century. And I hope that all the interested countries of the continent we share will join this document. We are working with our African friends to follow up on the decisions of Russia-Africa summits in 2019-2023. Next week, we will have the second ministerial conference of the Russia-Africa Cooperation Forum, and we will be preparing the next Russia-Africa summit for 2026. We are also seeking to step up our cooperation with Latin American and Caribbean countries. Brazil is our strategic partner in the region and in the world. We are working together in BRICS. We have a treaty on strategic cooperation with Venezuela. We reaffirmed our strategic cooperation with Nicaragua, which recognized Donetsk and Lugansk Republic, Zaporozhye and Kherson regions as being integral parts of Russia. We have been also proactive in our multilateral diplomacy, including as part of the group of friends to defend the UN Charter, which we created within the United Nations. We want the provisions set forth by the UN Charter to be fulfilled, considering the complementary nature and in an inclusive manner. BRICS has been at the center of the decision-making process. This is becoming an increasingly prominent group, which reflects the diversity of today's world. The Brazilian chairmanship followed up on many of the initiatives which were launched during the Kazan summit in autumn 2024 under Russia's chairmanship, including cross-border payment systems, reinsurance infrastructure, and grain stock exchange, and other initiatives. There is the SCO as well, one of the pillars in the emerging world order and a major element of the equal and indivisible security architecture for Eurasia that we want. At the September summit in China, there were important decisions this year, as I've already said, is marked by 8 years of victory, and we're doing everything possible to make sure that we mark these events the best way. We had in May of 2025 celebrations, and we're stepping up our efforts to oppose any attempts to rewrite the outcomes of the Second World War, including the verdicts of the Nuremberg trials. Every year, Russia submits a resolution to the UN General Assembly on combating the glorification of Nazism, and it has been approved this year as well. We will highlight the position of the former Axis powers. For several years now, they have been voting against this resolution on combating the glorification of Nazism. As you know, Germany is proactively supplying lethal weapons to a neo-Nazi regime. Chancellor Merz is talking about plans to make the Bundeswehr the strongest army in Europe. They probably forgot their dark past, and this should provide Germany food for thought. but any opposition is silenced in Germany. The same applies to Finland. During the Second World War, we know that Finland worked with Nazi Germany, and we have an impression that so many years of neighborly relations and mutually beneficial cooperation with our country did not help the Finnish establishment to master their beastly Russophobia. We want to make sure that the crimes of the German invaders are recognized as a genocide against the Soviet people during the Great Patriotic War.
The great victory contributed to the process of decolonisation. The peoples of the South got their own statehood, and the decisive contribution of our country to their liberation is recognized across the world. On the 14th of December, we'll celebrate the 65th anniversary of the historical decision to give independence to colonized nations and countries. And the 14th of December, we expect it to be soon announced the International Anti-Colonialism Day, which will give an even more systemic nature of our anti-colonialist efforts, which are very relevant today. The Foreign Ministry closely cooperates with United Russia, which initiated and plays a leading role in the international movement for freedom of nations, regularly hosting meetings of today's anti-colonialism activists. It was our initiative with the support of a group of friends in the UN. The 4th of December has been pronounced by the General Assembly the International Day of Combating Unilateral Measures. Our efforts to shape institutions, logistics and financial institutions uncontrollable by the West, with all the turbulence of the international arena, we make great efforts to unite the international community in fighting trans-border challenges and threats. In October, in Hanoi, a UN Convention against cyber crime was signed, the first universal international treaty on preventing the use of international technologies in malicious deeds. Countering any forms of discrimination is also one of our priorities. We keep working on consolidating a multi-confessional, multinational Russian world, protecting the positions of the Russian language and the cultural legacy of our country. We pay special attention to implementing our President's decree on providing humanitarian support to individuals who share the traditional Russian spiritual values. And we have received invaluable support from representatives of traditional Russian confessions. We also use the potential of cultural diplomacy. This year, Russia successfully hosted the first international song contest Intervision, aimed at bringing up young people in the spirit of previous generations. We work with our international partners to make this competition, the song contest, annual. Of course, we pay great attention to intermunicipal cooperation. We do presentations of Russian regions on the venue of the Foreign Minister of the Russian Federation, and these presentations enjoy great popularity among country ambassadors. We also developed the practice of holding inter-regional forums with a whole number of states, mostly our partners in the CIS and other blocs. Dear colleagues, the international policy approved by the President is strategic and long-term and aims to realize large-scale state goals. It's important that in today's pivotal moment of global development, our initiatives are supported by leading political powers of the country and enjoy understanding among citizens. This gives our efforts stability and boost our country's authority, reputation in the world. In conclusion, once again, I'd like to emphasize our commitment to joining our efforts with lawmakers and the Federation Council in boosting the positions of the Russian Federation as one of the biggest states in the world, the Eurasia, and one of the centers of the emerging world order. Thank you, Minister Lavrov, for a very rich presentation, highly professional as usual. Sergei Martynov, please. Minister Lavrov, how do you see further dynamic of our relations with Europe and the USA? Shall we expect any improvement in the negotiations process and the lifting of sanctions in the near future? Well, the president has been talking extensively about that in detail. Of course, the situation has evolved somewhat, but in general, the trend is the same. The West is not united, and we see this in the events of the last few days, when Trump, in one of his interviews, evaluated Europe's actions to hold back the agreements that could have actually been achieved on the Ukrainian track, eliminating the root causes that are the main obstacles on this way. But Europe has been holding back this process, instigating the so-called Ukrainian leader, encouraging him to fight till the last Ukrainian. The thing is, they're short of money. And right now, this ideological agenda is being influenced by money concerns, because there's no other way for them other than rip off the Russian Federation and take, in violation of all international laws, to take our gold reserves. They have no other sources of financing this war. All this given the fact that a whole number of countries, including EU members and opposition parties in NATO countries, recognize the pointlessness of continuing to pursue this policy. However, Europe is blindfolded by its desire to deliver strategic defeat to the Russian Federation. Some of them even say in their media interviews that they can't think of a situation when they'll have to swallow the defeat of their puppet, and will have to admit the fact that Russia is reaching its lawful goals. Of course, it's their problems, but they created them for themselves, and they are making them worse for themselves, trying to cling on to the absolutely pointless policy. Against this background, the US is growing more and more impatient. President Trump, who, as I said, was the only one of Western leaders, immediately after taking his office in the White House this January, he was the only one who started showing an understanding of the reasons that made the war in Ukraine inevitable, that are the foundation of the hostile activities taken by the West, taken by ex-President Biden. And now we are seeing the culmination story, this whole story, and the fact that President Trump agreed that the root cause must be eliminated, and that's the inadmissibility of Ukraine joining NATO and the need to reclaim the people from Ukrainian regime, to reclaim people whose rights had been trampled by the junta. All this is now being actively discussed. And of course, I should mention that the only Western leader who actually cares for human rights in this situation is also Donald Trump. I hope I'm not opening a big secret. The terms brought here by Stephen Witkoff and discussed with the president of the Russian Federation, they say explicitly that what is left of Ukraine must protect the rights of national minorities and religious freedoms in accordance with international legislation. And it's a good thing we're discussing this now, because amendments to this American document, of course, they are well classified now, but human rights, we can't make secrets of human rights. So the proposition made by the American part about defending all human rights and ensuring religious rights, Europe insisted that they be amended. And their version says differently. The European version calls for Ukraine to stick to the rights to minorities and religious freedoms exercised in the European Union. Feel the difference, you see? This arrogance, this holier-than-thou attitude of Europe in violation of traditions and norms of the rest of the world, I think, is one of the reasons why President Trump and his team say more and more often, talk more and more often about a profound crisis in Europe, and about that crisis definitely moving in the wrong direction. Thank you. Thank you. Oleg Zintsov, please. Minister Lavrov. Currently, a more fair world order is being formed and developed, where voices of developing countries sound louder and louder, while the Western-centric world policy is becoming a thing of the past. And the current system of international relations has seen many major, even global conflicts. Do you think the current standoff between the West and the East and its hotspot in Ukraine, will it lead to the formation of a new system of global relations, or is it impossible without global phenomena? I think it's an objective process. It's the progress of history. It's the result of economic development. You see, when decades ago, soon after World War II, especially after the end of the Cold War, when the West was touting the ideals of globalization, in the spirit of Fukuyama's end of history, they were saying that only liberal values will be commonly accepted across the world, and there will be no competition and no alternative to that across the world. And those instruments of globalization were touted and pushed forward across the world, not as just Western standards, but as global human values. I don't know who exactly that was, but 20 or 30 years ago, someone said, a Washington official said, that dollar is not American property. It's a common good that oils the gears of the world's economy. I said in my introduction speech, as President Trump spoke very harshly of Biden's actions when Biden and his team used dollar as an instrument of sanctions, as an instrument for punishing the unobedient, an instrument in reaching their goals. And when he became president for the second time, in his official speeches, President Trump strongly criticized BRICS, mostly for challenging the dominance of the dollar. And President Putin responded to that remark by saying that we did not give up dollar. We were cut off from dollar, once again abusing its status as the world reserve currency and using it as a political weapon. So we were forced to look for alternatives, and we will do so. We will continue to do so. And this egotistical and aggressive stance of the United States that we have been observing since the Biden theme makes other countries also think twice. Not only Russia, but other countries that found themselves on the receiving end of Europe's and American sanctions. They all start asking, what will they dislike today, the controllers of the financial markets?
This means that the trend to create alternative payment platforms, this is a sustainable trend and has been gaining momentum within BRICS, within the SCO, as I've already mentioned. I can also say that the president was very clear when he said that we were not the ones who moved away from the dollar. They imposed this solution on us. We had to act this way because the West has weaponized the US dollar, primarily the United States. We are witnessing an emerging world order, and we can see that the economy and in the financial sector, this process is evolving. The second point I wanted to make deals with decolonization. Fighting neocolonialism and colonialism in general, if we view colonialism as international practices when you live on the account of others. There was this decolonization movement in 1965, and more African countries became independent in the process, and this was primarily a political decision. There were celebrations to mark this occasion, but quite quickly it became clear that political independence does not necessarily lead to economic independence. For example, if independent countries with UN membership find themselves in a state of economic and financial dependency, and the rules of the International Division of Labor were imposed by the globalists in St. Petersburg in the Second Russia-African Summit. This was when President of Uganda, Mr. Museveni, made a very detailed speech on this regard. He recalled the international coffee market. It's worth about 450 billion euros per year. Africa is the main producer of coffee beans, but Africa would receive about just 40 billion out of 450 billion. All the rest is added value on packaging and roasting beans, and all this, the rest of the money went to Western countries and stayed in the West. And this is a starking example of the fact that political independence does not necessarily mean economic independence. And today, when we communicate with our African friends, we see this growing appetite for economic justice to get free from this economic dependence. They want economic justice, even if achieving it can be quite challenging. So this is Africa's second awakening in fighting for its interests in the global economy. There are many examples of this kind. In Latin American and Caribbean countries in their community. With the arrival of President Lula to power in Brazil, he initiated a debate on defending the country from the whims of the international financial system and those who run it. So these processes are gaining momentum. And the main tenets of globalization have been discredited, and we can all see this. We all know this. Principles like fair competition, private property, the presumption of innocence, and many other principles have been trampled upon when someone had to punish the Russian Federation. But for what? For many years, we have been warning our Western partners, and we were forced to launch a special military operation. So the Western-led globalization in the post-Cold War world order is becoming a thing of the past. Instead, we're witnessing the fragmentation of the global economy. More and more countries understand that regional mechanisms provide better frameworks for development. This is why we focus in our latest foreign policy concept in Eurasian security and building a Eurasian cooperation framework by creating this greater Eurasian partnership in transport and logistics and other sectors. This meets the agenda that we are and the vision that we have and reflects this Eurasian approach. More and more countries are interested in joining this process. The President has articulated our goals in this regard, and I already mentioned the way we work with our friends in Belarus. They hold the Eurasian Security Conference in autumn. I took part in all three of them. The fourth one will take place next year. There is growing interest among Asian countries to these countries as well as from the countries in the west of the Eurasian continent. My colleague and friend Petr Siarto, the foreign minister of Hungary, takes part in this conference regularly. There are representatives of Serbia and Slovakia, and I believe that this will become an increasingly high-profile event. This goes to say that multipolarity, a multipolar world order, is not just words that we put on paper in the UN Security Council. What makes this multipolarity strong is that it is an imperative. It is an imperative in terms of rethinking the legacy of globalization. Why China has been designated by the main competitor as the main threat? Because there was a time when China accepted the rules of the game as part of this globalization process that was supposed to benefit everyone, and China accepted these rules and started fine-tuning its mechanisms for becoming an active participant in these processes, and it sprinted ahead of those who invented this globalization, and while playing by their rules on their field. And now the Europeans and the United States complain that China makes very good high technology products at lower costs. So all these international projects that were advertised as common good, their sole purpose is to benefit from them. Everyone remembers this. So regardless of all the challenges in terms of moving away from this old system, there is the IMF, the WTO, the World Bank, but still this process is underway. And when we define new cooperation frameworks, no one wants to close the IMF, the WTO, the World Bank. At the same time, there is a process to reform these institutions, but it's not about real reform. BRICS and SCO countries and the global majority in general want the norms in these institutions to comply with reality so that the voting rights the global south has reflects its economic weight. The United States has been standing in the way of reforming the quota system. They have been pressuring sovereign states in order to maintain veto right on any decisions taken by the IMF. During the Biden administration, this resulted in unimaginable figures in terms of the funding that was sent to Kiev, the WTO, once again. China has been winning and overcoming its rivals on the international market. This is why Washington has been preventing WTO from filling vacancies in its dispute resolution mechanism. So all these cases that have to be resolved according to WTO rules cannot be resolved. I would call for reason. So when we pursue reforms within the global financial institutions, I would suggest to have a plan B. You always need a plan B. Thank you so much. Ms. Nikonorova, please. Thank you so much, Ms. Matvienko. Mr. Lavrov, I would like to thank you for the Foreign Ministry's contribution to resolving the Ukraine crisis and prioritizing human rights. My question is about the information sector. There is this information blockade by the West. The global media space is filled with misleading information about Russia and the special military operation. And in this connection, we probably need to do more to spread more verified and accurate information about Russia. This is what Sputnik and RT do. Are there any plans to expand the existing mechanisms or create new ones in this domain? Sputnik and RT, indeed, they are foreign language media outlets, but they also offer their content in Russian. So countries with large Russian diasporas, these networks also offer their programming in Russian. But what matters the most, as you said, are foreign nationals who are being misled, tricked, and fooled, if I may say. They face these false narratives, as we say today. And of course, media outlets, international media outlets. You've mentioned two major ones that are international brands. This is why they face so much backlash. And long before what happened in Ukraine, neither RT nor Sputnik were able to get accreditation at the Élysée Palace, the presidential palace in France. And there was an official who referred to Macron. This official was in charge of accreditation. He said that we believe that you are not a media outlet, but a propaganda tool. That was it. And I've raised this issue on several occasions with my French colleagues. And I think that the president even told President Macron about this. We're being accused of distorting facts without ever providing any evidence to back these claims. In this regard, we need to do everything to support our broadcasters which of course are a minority in the global media sector, and we need to support Western media outlets that are becoming increasingly reasonable. There are media outlets of this kind. They must be able to draw conclusions independently, and there are those who are capable of doing this, but we also need to work on the diplomatic front to achieve the truth, and we already know what happened in Bucha.
And the proverbial case of Bucha, you know how it happened when, as a gesture of goodwill, President remembered this recently, to push forward agreements that had been proposed by the Ukrainians, but the Ukrainians were banned by Boris Johnson from continuing the negotiations in 2022. And when there was still hope that an agreement could be achieved, as a gesture of goodwill, we pulled our troops from the suburbs of Kiev in Bucha. For 2 days, the mayor of the city was talking on TV that they are back in their homes again. And then 3 days later, BBC reporters were there on the central streets, the center of Bucha. They filmed dead bodies that obviously had been lying there for 3 days, really, and nobody had seen them but the BBC. And then there was the new wave of sanctions, accusations of atrocities, and ever since, for 4 years, we've been trying to find the truth. I said several times that in the UN Security Council, looking Secretary General Guterres in the eyes, I asked him to at least give me the list of people whose bodies were found by the BBC film crew there, who miraculously found themselves there on that day. We wrote official letters to the European Commissioner on Human Rights, and there's an establishment there especially created for Ukraine, but we didn't get any answer. And when Guterres' press secretary was asked, he said they were all for human rights, they were all for transparency, but sometimes they cannot disclose information because there are human lives at stake. Well, this is ridiculous. And of course, we will continue demanding from the UN to stop playing unfairly, to stop Ukrainizing the Secretariat, where the leading positions have been privateered by the West, and the NATO and the European Union, all the key positions. Of course, Russia has the Deputy Secretary General on combating terrorism. China has Deputy Secretary General on matters of social and economic development, but political matters, peacekeeping matters, humanitarian matters, of course, across the world, matters of ensuring security within the UN. I mean, all mechanisms that actually determine the activities of the Secretariat and budgets, they are all in the hands of the West. And they've been abusing it more and more. We have been talking about this. And we have to think about the future of the United Nations so that, God forbid, it doesn't go the path of the OSCE. So I absolutely agree with you. Support of mass media defending the truth and pushing inconvenient questions on international platforms. Would add to that parliamentary diplomacy. It's a very important instrument. There's also Maxim Grigoriev. His organization and his team accumulates the atrocities and crimes perpetrated by the Ukrainian regime. We have taken them to OSCE, and his efforts, all these facts, are becoming increasingly harder to ignore. Thank you. Dear colleagues, just Foreign Minister Lavrov, due to the fragmentation of international cooperation in the Arctic, including Russia's withdrawal from the Barents region, and the weakening of the Arctic Council in general, what alternative mechanisms of multi-format cooperation does Foreign Ministry see to ensure stable development of the region and to defend Russia's interests in the region? Well, the Arctic Council still retains its mechanisms, and Western members of this once central structure, a structure that was once central to defining the policy, the higher latitudes, they understand that the collapse of the Arctic Council is undesirable, especially considering the real technological and political positions our country holds in the Arctic. So they refused to meet on the ministerial level, but they continue expert level meetings. Sometimes they hold them online, but still the Arctic Council still exists. Well, I proceed from the fact that the Arctic Council will one day regain its potential. This will take time, of course, because members of the Arctic Council, especially from Northern Europe, I mentioned Finland and Norway and Sweden here, they are currently run by governments that are not big fans of constructive work. But still, sessions of the Arctic Council on other levels are taking place. And the 14th session took place in May 2025, and they passed a statement that confirmed the general position that the Arctic Council is the key venue for multilateral cooperation in the Arctic region, in the transpolar region. And there must be a common vector towards ensuring peace and security and creating favorable conditions for work. Regardless of what is happening in the Arctic Council, we are in favor of it persisting. But for it to function as efficiently as possible, we need to remove this Ukrainization of agenda in this structure as well. In the meanwhile, of course, we continue exploring the region, high latitudes, and the North Sea route. We cooperate with our strategic partners such as China and India, regardless of any plans entertained by the Arctic Council. We have our sovereignty over the North Sea route, and we actively explore it with the help of friendly states. the participation of friendly states. There's a structure that appeared in parallel with the Arctic Council. There's also a non-governmental organization, cooperation of northern regions and countries. It's called the Northern Forum. And there's also the Arctic Economic Council. It's a business community. All this was harmonized with the program work of the Arctic Council, but with a certain slowdown in the work of the non-governmental organization, these structures keep functioning. And of course, the topic of the Arctic is regularly discussed at the St. Petersburg Economic Forum to an extent. And there's also our brand, Arctic, the Territory of Dialogue. It's an Arctic forum that convenes regularly. And there's the recently created International Forum Arctic, the present and future, named after Artur Chiringarov. So non-governmental formats also develop actively. And I think this is very useful, especially considering that we encourage the role of regions in international connections and establishing ties with adjacent regions. I think these connections, they give birth to projects, real life projects. And all these formats that I mentioned here, they must be coordinated to avoid duplication, to ensure consistency. So this is very real, and we do this together with our relevant authorities in charge of the Arctic cooperation. Thank you. Unfortunately, we have to end the Q&A session. Thank you. Thank you, Minister Lavrov. Thank you for your policy of forming a multipolar world policy. The reality of multipolar world and decreasing Russia's dependence on Western states and improving its access to international markets. What are the priorities? They are the priorities of Russia's international policy. What other tasks remain in these directions? Well, it's a very broad question. I'll try to be brief, but to be brief, I'll have to admit that this is not the jurisdiction, not so much the jurisdiction of the foreign ministry. It's an all-Russian issue, and we have a whole number of mechanisms, intergovernmental commissions on all key tracks. Recently, we had this Council on National Projects and Strategic Development. And it was said a lot there about what has to be done to reach the objectives you mentioned. I think the most important thing is to rely on, in part, that is the foreign ministry's jurisdictions. We need to pursue a foreign policy that will ensure the most favorable external terms for our internal development, ensuring our security, economic growth, and improving the well-being of our citizens. And the whole architecture of our mechanisms is aimed at achieving these goals. It's just everybody should work in unison, in harmony, giving priority to state interests. Thank you. Thank you very much, Minister Lavrov. I'm at a loss for words, but this was a brilliant speech. Take a seat, please.